Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. I am so happy to be here with you. I'm here with my friend Craig Cohen, executive producer and host of Houston Public Media's Houston Matters. Thanks for being here with us today, Craig, in the middle of this crazy, messy moment in our lives.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and crazy and messy are sort of my areas of expertise, so yeah. Happy to do it.
Me too. Well, we're glad to have you. I'm guessing most everybody who's here has joined because they are familiar with your work and they know who you are, but I would love for you to just take a second and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you in case anybody doesn't.
Sure. So I, as you said, I'm the host and executive producer of Houston Matters, which airs weekday mornings at 9 on News 88.7. And we have been on the air since 2013. We're sort of what we characterize ourselves as your essential daily guide to the people, places, issues, and ideas that define Greater Houston. And I've been doing that work, hosting talk shows for, about more than a decade now, and have been in public media for 20-something years. One of these days, it's going to become 30-something. I'd rather not focus on that right now. So we'll just say I've been in broadcasting, radio and television for a long time.
Well, I'm a huge fan, and so is everybody in my office. We are passionate Houston people, so it's one of our favorite go-tos for keeping up with what's happening in the community and getting to know new people in the community and things like that. So we love your work. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
So for everybody's benefit, just to tell you how this happened, how we got here, a couple of weeks back, Craig sent me a note just to say that he had been paying attention to the web chats that we had been hosting and to tell me a little bit about what they're doing over at Houston Public Media, which if you haven't taken inventory of is really impressive. Just the shifts that they made so quickly to support the needs of this community in this time. It's really been helpful to me as a business owner and as a mom, especially too, with some of the kids programming and things like that. But we were talking about just everything that we're going through and everything that we're learning and how the community is changing and started to get to the root of the fact that there are some silver linings in all of this and some things that we're figuring out as we navigate these uncharted waters. And this theme started emerging as we were talking about figuring it out, just going with it and figuring it out. It reminded me of this conversation that I had with a good friend and mentor of mine, Angela Blanchard, years and years ago, about what she calls figure it out leadership. And from that conversation that I was having with her that just really always stayed with me, I started thinking about the kind of people that I surround myself with and just the kind of thing that I look for in the people that I have in my life. I just love the people who kind of whatever needs to happen, they're just all in on figuring it out. And as we were talking, we started just talking about how that spirit has kind of risen up in everybody that we're seeing in Houston. So at Black Sheep, we kind of operate by this figure it out. We actually call ourselves figure it outers, and we spend a great deal when we're getting to know a new candidate and bringing them on board to determine, do they have that spirit? We think about it in terms of generally like someone who is charging forward, taking steps towards solving a challenge and just kind of moving ahead no matter whether they know where to start or they know what they're doing. And right now, more than ever, we're seeing that in our community and kind of around the world. So Craig gets to talk to a lot of amazing people across the greater Houston area on his show. And he has this incredible vantage point for seeing how Houston is figuring things out right now. So I want to dive into that today, and just for everybody's benefit to know that we're going to talk through a few things that came up in our conversation, and then we'll save time for Q&A towards the end of our time together. So I'm going to kick it to Craig for a minute, and just would love to start by asking you what's some of the things that you've noticed as Houstonians try to navigate this unknown territory. Like, what are some of the patterns that you're seeing?
Well, I think the first thing that I noticed was how much we were trying at the outset to compare what we were dealing with to Harvey and to other flooding events around the greater Houston region. You know, we'd had, 5 events in 5 years, essentially, or in 6 years. And so there was the tendency to think, Houston, we're used to this. We're used to, something floods, people deal with the impact of that. We rebuild, we are resilient. And then I think maybe it started to click in somewhere in that first week or 2 or 3, especially once we hit the point where we were all told, oh, no, stay home orders are going into place, that, oh, wait a minute, this is very different because we can't see the storm coming and we can't see the storm going, and we don't know when this is going to end exactly. And that has forced us, I think, all to think a little bit differently about this, about the coronavirus and COVID-19 and its impact on greater Houston in a very different way from how we looked at what happened during Harvey, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of forced us into, viewing this through a slightly different lens. And through that lens is how we've sort of come up with a few lessons learned along the way that I think you and I were talking about the other day.
Yeah, it's interesting that the hurricane thing has been very real in my observation too. It's almost like we're in such unknown territory that we're almost desperate for the disaster that we know better.
Yeah.
Which is a really messed up thing to say, that like you'd rather have the disaster you're familiar with than the disaster that you're not, because Lord knows we don't want any of it. But
and we have to prepare for the possibility that we could be facing both.
Right.
Yeah, that we're closing in on the start of hurricane season here, June 1st. And so that will be an ever-present consideration.
Yeah, we can't handle it. Let's tell the universe that now. Okay, well, let's jump into what we talked about. So we kind of got to this place where we had five things that you and I really connected on and felt like, yeah, there's something to that worth exploring. And the first thing was that social distancing is not emotional distancing. And one of the fun things to think about for me, for you as a reporter, the number of times that you hear some of these new terms. Like I think back to my college days of the drinking games that you played, where you heard the same word over and over again. Like social distancing must just be a part of almost every conversation that you're having. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing related to social distancing, and how people are handling it, and really like pushing through to make that emotional connection and to make sure that they're still connected to each other, to the community, to the things that are important to them during this strange time where they have to be separate.
Well, I'll tell you, let's start with, thank goodness we have reached a point with technology that we're able to do things like what we're doing today, that we're all able to connect with one another for better or worse through social media. There is no doubt that we are in a place today that even 10 years ago, it would have been a far more isolating experience. 20 years ago, without question. I'm thinking of a guest I just had on the show the other day, Phil Eaton. He's principal at Lake Creek High School in Montgomery County, and he was one of the folks that developed he tested positive for the coronavirus. got the more serious COVID-19 illness, found himself in the hospital and actually unconscious for a few weeks. It was that bad. He spent more than a month in the hospital, was still in recovery when I talked with him late last week. And he talked about how valuable it was to him that there were students and teachers and staff members reaching out to him in various ways, including on social media, on Twitter. You look on his Twitter account, you see all these great well wishes and how important that was. Having that connection to people, even when you are physically apart, is so critical. Another way that we've explored it on Houston Matters, we did something that, to be honest with you, I'd been wanting to do since we launched the show, a concept I had called the Houston Matters Mixtape. And the idea was to ask Houstonians about a song they love, why they love it, tell us about it, we'll play a little bit of the music, and then go from one person to the next to the next. And we just never really had time to make that thing happen. And then it suddenly occurred to me in the midst of all this, that's exactly what we all need. I mean, music stirs the soul. It's every one of us probably has some song, something that really speaks to us, and we want to be able to communicate it in some way. Well, we just aired our third volume of it yesterday, and definitely has been one of the more popular things we've done over the last several weeks. And it allows people to connect with one another, even though we are physically apart. Social distancing, as you says, does not mean that you have to be emotionally distant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so powerful, and it's so great that you guys did that, because just the reason why I think I love Houston Matters so much is that you guys make the community the stars of the show, and it's, the mixtape follows that same pattern and just does such a beautiful job of showing how we can be there for each other and connected, even in this really awkward time. I don't know if you've seen, I think music brings up a lot of emotion for me. It's definitely been helping me from a personal standpoint, just to really keep my spirits up, or to help me focus in times when it's hard to do that. And another thing that we're working on is, I'm not sure if you've seen the Houston Music Foundation that was founded in the middle of all this by Mark and Rachel Austin. We're working in collaboration with them. They're giving away grants to musicians, which there's such a demand for in our city, and so many musicians that play like from different walks of life and different genres that are in the pockets of this city, and now trying in their own way to manage the complexities that this has imposed on them. I mean, no live shows. There's so many things, so many layers to what they're dealing with. Anyway, Houston Music Foundation is doing a grant program and just sprung up from this. I mean, so talk about one of the silver linings is that there's this support now for musicians that they plan to continue long after the pandemic is behind us. And we're working with them on something we're calling Playlists with Purpose. And so, same kind of spirit is, how can we share something uplifting with each other and tell stories to feel more connected and to kind of make it through this and to understand the depths of what's going on in our city. So I really appreciate that. And there's thousands of ways. Like you see the food bank is a shining example of that emotional connection. I don't know if you've seen what they're doing as people are coming to pick up food that they need, just to try to bring joy and uplift spirits. They've got hula hoopers, and they're really trying to not just let the humanity get away, that the connection that needs to be there, especially in those incredibly stressful situations.
It'll also be nice to see if we can maintain some of that as we do transition back to, or transition into, whatever the new normal will be for all of us, to try and keep all of that top of mind.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot after hurricanes. This is like the way the community is bonded in that disaster, and how do we get that to stay with us? And you know, that's something that I think Angela Blanchard actually studies quite a bit, and is such a brilliant inspiration in that department. Okay, so the second thing that we talked about is that we're more adaptable than we think we are. So in the city of figure it outers, now we're getting pushed to a new level of creative community thinking beyond our typical hurricane and flood tricks and hacks and tools in our toolbox. I know my team was set up to work remotely. So for us, it was an easier transition than I think it might have been for a lot of people. We didn't have that deficit of, oh gosh, you know, what technology do we use and how does this work? We were pretty savvy in that department. So I feel like we had a little bit of an advantage. But how have you seen in your interviews or people adapting, but then also just like from a Houston public media perspective, I mean, you guys have been on it with shifting to meet the needs of the community. So I'd love to just hear a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, in terms of shifting, we've made changes to both our radio and television schedules. And they're the kinds of changes that under normal circumstances would seem pretty big. Under these circumstances, I don't know, almost feels like, well, of course we should do that. But you know, the first thing that I think went through, and I can't get into the brains of Houston Public Media's managers, but I think it started with, okay, wait a minute, how can we help? How can we take this mission, this thing we do called public media, and make it as valuable as possible to people now that suddenly the dynamics have totally changed. People aren't in their cars, they're at home. They've got all kinds of different priorities and needs, childcare, education. And springing from that pretty quickly, we came up with a few things. One was to dramatically revamp our TV programming lineup during the day to satisfy the needs of K through 12 students and teachers and parents and districts, to make sure that there was programming that would accompany the teaching at home that people are going to need to do. That's a change, and we completely revamped that schedule from early in the morning right up until, you know, late in the afternoon. That's going to continue to be tweaked here, I think, in the next month or two or three, as we transition away from people finishing up semesters at home to whatever their needs may be for the summer. We also changed the radio schedule. The first thing we did was launch a second hour of Houston Matters that airs every weekday afternoon at 3, a special edition of the show with a completely different production team. And they were basically tasked with have somebody on each day who can answer basic questions about the coronavirus. And let's just open up the phone lines and we'll keep doing it as long as we need to. They've done a terrific job in the weeks since. They've expanded a little bit from just the medical impacts of the coronavirus to talking about some of the economic impacts and some other things. But that also frees us up, the rest, you know, the Houston Matters team, if you will, Houston Matters Classic, whatever you want to call us, at 9 a.m. to really examine everything through that prism, but all sorts of issues and ideas, basically do what we would normally do, but understanding that we're in this COVID-19 world and applying that to what we're doing. So we could accomplish all of that without having to, you know, blow out 30 minutes, 40 minutes just taking calls, though we do still take some calls. So those are a couple of the big things we did right off the bat. We created a bunch of digital tools, made them available, again, free of charge to parents and teachers and everyone with supporting educational information. All of it coming down to what can we do? And then there's also, just in terms of the radio news operation, we figured out pretty fast and actually pretty early in this whole process that we were going to need to identify ways to do what we're doing from home as quickly as possible. Now, with Houston Matters, we had a sort of year's head start because we had purchased this piece of equipment, and actually I'm going to show you, I've got it right here. I connect up through this sucker to another piece of equipment that is hardwired into the station right into our control board. And so when I go on the air in the mornings, I pull over a microphone and I talk into it, and it sounds like I'm in studio. And we have been using this for the last year for what we called live remote hits, just going around different places around the region. When there were events or something we wanted to highlight, interview somebody, we sent reporters and producers all around. And it worked really well for 10 minutes at a time. And we thought, well, if it can work for 10 minutes, what's the impediment to just doing this all the time from home? So I was the guinea pig on March 13th. And it worked out so well, in fact, that I think I went back for one show that Monday, and then I've been home ever since. And then we wound up purchasing a number of other of these units for other reporters and producers so they could do their work from home as well. The Houston Matters team, there are 4 other producers in addition to me at 9 a.m. All but one are home every day, and the other 4 rotate through who comes in, and that's just to handle our phones and to sort of coordinate what's happening on the air from the studio.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that you guys were prepared. I mean, it makes a lot of sense for you to have some of those backup plans in place early, but I can't imagine, there were some businesses that were just completely unprepared.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Not everybody can do that.
Interesting, like heroic adaptability stories that you've heard from the folks that you've talked to that stand out.
Well, I think kind of everyone. I'll mention one that occurs to me, which is Harris County Public Health's Executive Director, Umar Shah. He's been a regular on the show through the years whenever there have been any sort of health scenarios playing out. And it was fascinating watching his personal adaptation to all of this, because like really early in the process, he came in studio for an interview one day, and we both did that sort of awkward, wait, should we shake hands? Nope, we're going to do an elbow bump. And that was the first thing. And then the next time it was, okay, now we're actually going to stay socially distant from one another during this interview. The next time he was on the phone, and the next, and it kind of kept, and you could sense even in the language and in the tone of his voice that he was adapting right along with the rest of us. And I think that's sort of the point, is that we're doing this on the fly a little bit, and we just have to get comfortable with that reality.
Well, and I mean, for me, the thing I'm so grateful for in a strange way is just the connection that it gives everybody. I mean, we for the first time, maybe ever, everyone can realize we all have something in common. That's always true. But it's really on the surface now, and hopefully that will be a bonding thing that will shift humanity in ways that will be beautiful. So
yeah, you know what? We cover a lot of politics on the show. I appreciate the sentiment. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. You be the realist. I'll be the optimist.
Okay.
Okay. So point 3, the third thing that we talked about was, and I really enjoyed talking to you about this. When faced with forces we can't control, we seek out those we can. My agency studies human behavior constantly, because all of the work that we do centers around trying to activate people around things that matter. And so we're constantly looking at this, and I have absolutely seen evidence of it, but it was so fun to hear your perspective, and particularly your personal observation, self-awareness about this issue. So I'd love to just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, what's been running through my head for the last several weeks is something that I've never been a part of, a 12-step program, but they have something in a lot of those programs that they tend to repeat, the Serenity Prayer, and I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but the basic concept of it is that you want to be granted the serenity to accept the things you cannot change, to the courage to change the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I have been trying to keep that in my head and focusing on, okay, what can I get done, and not worry quite so much about forces outside me that I cannot control, whether that be things that are political or economic or health or what have you. And so that's good. But if you let your emotions kind of drive you through that experience, you can maybe go a little overboard. And I guess the one example I'd give was about a month or so ago, I noticed on one of my credit card bills that was being overcharged slightly by AT&T Basically, they were charging me for the next month ahead, and I knew I was only going to owe like $5 or $10, and it's listed $50. So I called them up and I harangued them and I harassed them, and it was I was going overboard. But finally, then I called the credit card company saying I'm not going to pay this, and really really went to town. I'm pleased to say, actually, in the end, they wound up relenting, and I got charged what I was supposed to. But I could probably have done it in a more thoughtful, responsible way, or I could have just said, you know what, their plan of sending me some debit card thing with the difference is fine. But the emotional sense of, okay, well, I can't do anything about COVID-19, but I can take this on.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we all sort of recognize there are going to be moments when people are really upset about something that seems kind of small. Mm-hmm. And that maybe it's that bigger thing that's weighing over them, and maybe give everybody, not just that physical space, give them a little bit of emotional space, let it all breathe for a moment, and kind of tamp down any conflicts that come up.
Yeah, that's so important. I remind myself of that about 30 or 40 times a day. I mean, with whether it's my husband or my kids or my parents or my clients or my team. I mean, it's so important because we all have 40 or 50 other things happening in our heads that are weighing on us that maybe we're not even aware of. So it's good that room to breathe is such a good way to put it. And I just try and have a check-in with myself every time I'm going to be talking to someone, to take a minute or two to think about, okay, what all is this person dealing with right now? What do they do for a living, and how might that be under stress right now? Do they have kids at home? Do they have childcare support? Do they, what else is affecting how this conversation might go, and how can I be empathetic? And it's such a good point. It's so fun to just think about Craig Cohen getting pissed off at AT&T, honestly. With your radio voice, I wonder if they knew who they were talking to.
Oh, no, we don't go there. I once told a friend of mine, if you ever hear me blurt out the phrase, "Do you know who I am?" you need to slap me.
No, you're not like that. I know that. So the fourth thing that we talked about is that and this is one of my favorite things to think about and just kind of daydream on, is we don't have to go back to the way we did things before. The other night, I felt like I was really suffocating in kind of a scarier aspect of this, just thinking about how broken some things were before, whether it's healthcare, education, or political divide, all of these things that we were already thinking should definitely be able to work better at this point. Now, the amount of stress that has come down on them, and the amount of other factors that have now invaded those already complex challenges, and just thinking, well, we don't have to go back to the way we were before. Well, I sure as hell hope we don't go back to the way we were before, but like, what are we going to do now? Because now it's even more maybe broken. So that's one of the things I'm thinking about. I think we were thinking about this from a more positive perspective when we were talking, but I think it goes both ways. So would just love to hear, your thoughts on like maybe what you think or hope that we should hold on to, maybe some things that you predict we will change up, anything like that.
I'll avoid predictions just because, kind of not really my thing, but I will say that I've been thinking about this really on much more practical terms. Like personally, I had never gone to pick up groceries in my life. And it finally occurred to me, wait a minute, I don't have to go into the grocery store. Let's do this online shopping thing, see if this works for me. And it works great for me. And then I'm one less person that's walking around in that grocery store. Maybe others have picked up on that's a habit that they can settle into long term. Knowing now that I can do the show from home, is if for no other reason, if this equipment can still be available to me, if the circumstances dictate, if I wake up one morning and I'm not feeling well, I could theoretically still host the show from home and I'm not, spreading germs to anybody, whether we're talking about COVID-19 or something else. Being more, not so much flexible, but adaptable, and saying it's not just about how do we do the same things we've always done, but in a slightly different way, saying, do we even need to be doing those things? Do I need to be setting my alarm at 5 a.m. so that I'm out the door at 6 a.m. so that I'm at the station by 7 a.m. so that I can effectively do the show, leaving at 5 p.m., getting home at 6 p.m., and then do the whole thing over again? Or could I actually sleep until 6 or 6:30, still start the day at 7 a.m., just do it here? Gosh, that seems to be a real potential advantage. So it's one of those things I'll be talking with my supervisor about, and we'll be knocking around, okay, when is it appropriate to do that? When is it not? But really sort of change. These could be some big changes for some folks. Not everybody's in that position, of course. There are people who are out of work, a lot of them, and it's awful for them right now, and you hope that jobs will become available for them. And then there are folks who must go into whatever workplace they have, and you hope that their workplace will establish protocols that are safe. But for the folks who can, maybe working from home maybe this is the future.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you don't like predictions.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things I'm struggling with so much right now is it is my job to look to the future and to create strategy around how things might work in the future. And it is such a challenge right now to even know what we'll be facing from week to week. So we're all limited, and that really is, I think, how we all got forced into this. We're just going to figure it out as we go kind of perspective. I'll be very curious to watch how Houston Public Media continues to plan and think ahead, and when we're in a more normal time, what Houston Public Media will look like. It's fascinating to think about and to watch as we go. The last thing, and we're actually out of time, but I'm going to keep going because we've got one last thing, and we've got one really great question, and they kind of tie together. So the last point that we talked about was just as we go into this reopening phase, which is incredibly unpredictable, to continue on that train of thought. How do we know how to proceed, and what will that look like and feel like, and how do we go into a situation where there may not be a right answer at all? And I want to just kind of tie that into the big question that we have, because it's actually from another public media professional, Hannah Siegel-Gardner with Marfa Public Radio, asked, how do you see public media functioning differently to serve the residents of Houston in the future? So, those are kind of two parallel tracks. How do we go into this where we don't have the answers, and what do you think that might feel like or look like?
Well, I think first we go. Now, some people are going to interpret that as, does that mean we all go back to work and say, darn, the coronavirus to heck, we're soldiering forward? No, not necessarily. And it doesn't mean going forward, so we're going to just cower at home for forever. We're not going to do that either. We're going to need to find a way, find a path, and we're going to find it awkwardly. We're going to find it with some contention, and we're going to do what we all always do, fight about it a little bit. And the role that public media can play in that, more than anything, I think, is to model a way to have those conversations, to hash out those issues, to passionately explore them, but without adding to that contention. If we could get to a point where not every single blasted thing that we all think of has to be politicized, has to instantly be viewed through a prism, a political lens, that's probably in our collective best interest. Maybe we can dial some of that back just a little bit. Hard to do in an election year, by the way. But also I can't tell you how many shows we get through where we suddenly realize, wait a minute, we didn't even talk about the fact that we're in an election year. because this has been such an overwhelming thing. So yeah, that's where I think public media can play an enormous role, is how to model those discussions.
Absolutely. And I am on the League of Women Voters board, which is a nonpartisan organization. And we've been thinking about that so much, like going back to the adaptability. How do we make sure that elections and democracy still continues to function productively, but also could we shift our focus and stop being so mad at the other person or the other party and start to align against a common enemy, which is the virus, and start looking out for each other and drop all of this contention and try to function as a together unit. That would be an amazing, I think here comes the optimist in me again. But I hope that'll happen. I am unfortunately sad to report that we're out of time, but it went by so fast because you have so many good stories and so much information to share. So I encourage everybody to tune in to listen more to Houston Matters, because I know that those stories will continue, and Craig's such a great guide through those conversations. It was really fun to have you join me. Fun and intimidating slightly to be the interviewer of the interviewer, but it was really great to talk through this with you, and I just wish you a healthy continuing journey through this madness.
Right back at you, Amy. Thanks so much. I enjoyed the time.
Yeah, have a great day. Thanks, Craig.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.